In this video, I'm going to show you to repaint your car with Rustoleum paint. In this tutorial, I'm using mineral spirits, a small mixing bucket, an HVLP spray gun, some gloves, a respirator with VOC and particulate filters in one. Optional is some paint hardener, some goggles, some paint strainers, and Rustoleum paint. Either the professional series or the normal series is fine. If you are not able to use an HVLP gun, you can always spray can it. You won't get as good a result, but this can still work and give you a good finish. A large air compressor. This is a 29 gallon, but the most important thing is that it's able to deliver the cubic feet per minute for your spray gun. Some paint stirrers, some denatured alcohol or a wax and grease remover will work. Some newspaper for masking, the masking tape, some microfiber towels, and a large assortment of sandpaper for a sander and hand sanding. Powered hand sander, acetone, a measuring cup. This includes areas where the clear coat and base coat is completely gone and it's bare metal and rusty, as well as areas where just the clear coat has eaten through and there's still some base coat left. Also, I'm going to be doing everything outside, so the end result will be the worst finish you could possibly get. I wouldn't suggest doing this. If you can, do it inside a garage. You could put fans right at the doorway, just blowing outward to always have fresh air. If you do it outside like I'm doing, debris from the sky or trees will get on the paint finish. For reference, this is Rustoleum flat black, and I did this directly underneath a tree, so this is the kind of finish that you could expect. There are slight contaminants that got into the paint as it was drying. You could see I could sand these out easily enough. The first step I'm going to do is power wash the entire car. If you don't have a power washer, you could use something like this, or you could just put your thumb over the end of the hose to give a little more velocity. Next, I'm going to wash the car down with soap and water. I'm using a degreaser, Purple Power, which is really good. You could also use dish soap. You don't want to use normal car wash because it can contain silicone, which will affect your finish and the paint adhering correctly. Now I'm going to rinse all the soap and water off. Once the water is completely dried, it's time to do the sanding and prep work. This will get dust everywhere, so if you have any vehicles or anything you don't want getting covered in dust, move it back away at least 20 feet. If you have bare metal with rust on it, you will need to remove it completely. You will also need to go further out and remove more paint just to make sure that you're getting all the oxidation off. You will need a very rough sandpaper for this. You can start out with a 60 grit. If you're going to sand this by hand, you could get a sponge like this, wrap it around it, and use this as a sanding block. Or you could use a normal hand sander like this, an electric or pneumatic one. What worked best for me was using a polycarbide abrasive wheel. This removed it very quickly. It also removed the existing paint much faster than sanding alone. So what I did is I used the polycarbide wheel to remove all the oxidation. Then I started with the 60 grit and moved up in progressive higher grits. I'm going to demonstrate now how to remove this with a polycarbide wheel. Also, I would not suggest using a wire wheel. It didn't seem to be effective at all. Now I'm going to go over the roughened up area with 80 grit on the palm sander. For any areas where the sander did not reach, I'm just going to use a sponge and sandpaper. Now I'm going to hit it with 120 grit to remove the 80 grit scratches. Next, I'm going to do 150 grit to take out the 120 grit scratches. At this point, the steel should be fairly shiny. It looks like a brushed appearance. You could somewhat see a reflection in it. The steel is at the same condition as the clear coat or exposed base coat, so anything I do to either of those, I will also be doing to the steel. Next step, I'm going to sand a 240 grit. You could use roughly a 220 grit if you need to. You could also sand this dry or wet. Areas like this where the clear coat is already gone, you need to be very careful or you could easily sand through the base coat all the way to the metal. So I'm going to go very quickly. The point is just to get rid of all this roughness right here and any leftover clear coat. For the clear coat, you don't have to worry as much because there's plenty of thickness left, so you can spend a little more time on it. Next, I'm going to wet sand with 400 grit sandpaper. This isn't designed for wet sanding, but it's all I have, and I've tried it before and it has not come apart, so I'm going to use it. To wet sand, all you need to do is mist water on the surface like this. and then just sand it in back and forth motions. If you have bare metal, immediately dry it with a paper towel or something so it doesn't start rusting. For the base coat or clear coat, you don't need to worry about drying it. You can just leave it wet after you're done sanding it. Now the surface is prepared to accept primer, so I'm going to rinse it off with water and then blow it off with a leaf blower. Next, I'm going to mask off all around the areas I'm about to paint so I don't get overspray on the other panels. To do this, for instance on the hood, I'm just going to lift the hood and put newspaper all around it and tape it to the sides. I'm going to do the same for the doors and windows as well. Preparation for painting, I'm draining the air compressor of any moisture that might have collected, so when it fills up it'll be nothing but dry air. I have it in the garage here, so hopefully the air has relatively low humidity. Now I'm going to mix the primer. I have my primer, a measuring cup, gloves ready, a mixer to mix it, and the acetone to thin it. Now I am ready to prepare the primer, but before I do that, I'm going to run some plain acetone through here just to clean it out in case there's any gunk built up. Make sure and wear gloves at this point. You don't want the acetone getting in your skin. I'm also going to wear goggles for eye protection. You don't need much, just a few ounces. Now I'm just going to go run the acetone out of the gun. Now I'm going to mix the primer. I'm going to stir it just in case it's settled to the bottom. After I mix the primer, I want it to be roughly 15 to 25% acetone. If you go any more than that, it's too runny. The Rustoleum says it could be mixed up to 15% acetone, but I'm going to go just a hair more. I'm going to mix 2 ounces with 10 ounces of primer. So that comes out to 2 out of 12 or 1/6, which is around 16%. So first I'm going to pour the acetone in. The reason I do acetone first is if I do the paint first, the measurements will be covered in a layer of paint and you won't be able to see where the level is. So I'm going to measure out the 2 ounces now. I'm going to pour them in the bucket. I'm going to measure out the 10 ounces. This only goes to 8 ounces, but I don't even know if I have 10 ounces left in here, so I'm just going to pour it roughly until the very top right here. I run out of paint. There's definitely not 10 ounces, but it should be close enough. Now I'm going to pour this in with the acetone. Now that it's mixed up, I'm going to get my sprayer ready. I have it just sitting in here so I don't have to hold it. I'm going to get the paint strainer, hold this over here while I pour the paint. Now I'm just going to cover up the reservoir. At this point, right before I'm about to paint, I'm going to clean the surface with a denatured alcohol. You want to do a very thorough job to remove any last bits of grease that might have collected on it. After you've cleaned the surface, it's best to test your pattern. So you want the pattern to be roughly 8 inches or so, 6 to 8 inches wide when you're holding the gun, roughly 10 inches away from the surface. So I'm going to fine tune the pressure and fan pattern right now. Also, definitely have your respirator on. Okay, so now it's time to start painting. What I'm going to do is start at the top and move my way across. I'm going to overlap roughly 70% until I reach the very bottom. I'm going to pay close attention to the edges. I need to make sure and hit those because those are the first failure points. So I'm going to demonstrate a few passes now. Also, you want the paint flowing before you hit the edge. If you don't, there'll be a big puddle where you started. So I'm going to pull the trigger well before I start. Pulling the trigger doesn't actually release the paint until you move it past the needle. So I'm going to start right here, and by this point I'm going to have the needle fully depressed and fluid will be moving through. Here's what it looks like after the first coat was just put down. Little bugs are already attracted to it. They're embedding themselves in the paint throughout the whole surface. Now that the primer is dried for roughly 25 minutes, I'm going to put on another coat. It should not be tacky at all at this point. Brush off any bugs if there happen to be on it. They seem to be attracted to it. The second coat is done. While this is flashing off, I'm going to go clean the gun and get ready to mix the paint. When mixing the top coat, it's the exact same steps as mixing the primer. So I'm going to start by first stirring up the paint. I'm going to measure out the 2 ounces of acetone. This step is optional, but I'm going to add a hardener. I'm going to add 1 ounce. Now I'm going to add the 10 ounces of paint. I'm going to stir it all up. Now I'm going to apply the first layer of paint. For this first layer, I'm going to keep it relatively light so it flashes quickly. Then I'm going to add a much heavier second and third layer. And this is the paint job after curing for a few days. As you can see, it turned out okay. If you wanted to take this even smoother, you would wet sand it again and then finish it with some compound. But this needs to harden up for at least a week. This is still very soft, so it can scratch fairly easily. To speed up the process, you can just let it sit in the sun and let it get very hot. This is just the morning dew sitting on it and drying. And this is debris that dried into it. Some of it's bugs, some of it's leaves. And that is how to paint your car like a redneck.